Over the next couple of minutes, I'm going to try to outline what seem to be two disparate elements and how they connect with one another. Both of them are current events that I've given a kind of explanation of. Changes in the public mind over the years, and changes in the power elite and their general demeanor and their general focus over the last, in particular, let's say 30 years, since I guess the proximate point would be since the end of the Cold War, how they have transformed since then, and how that has affected what I've talked about before, the imperial project, the imperial American project having run out of juice, there being no more rah-rah, no more support our troops. That's really, that's out there in enough abundance to sustain involvement in a full-scale war, as was the case in 1990, 1991 with the first Gulf War, and in 2003 with the war in Iraq. So a while back, I recorded this video in which I drew a connection between the end of the Cold War and the shift in the power elites' attitudes and focus, and how essentially during this, even with all of the negative and pernicious social trends that went on through the 60s and the 70s in particular, and they trace their origins well before that, the eugenics movement, the anti-family movement, feminism, the pill, the sexual revolution, these kinds of things that I think had a absolutely destructive and intentionally destructive effect on the culture, generally speaking. That even with all of those things in mind, the general social and cultural, those running the show, let's just say, those in charge of seeding the ideas into the minds of the masses, there was not this intense hostility towards the Native American. And by Native American, I don't mean American Indian. I mean native-born, mostly white Americans. There was not this hostility expressed towards this particular demographic while the Cold War was going on. And while the Cold War was going on, I talked before in the prior video, and I'll try to find it so I can link to it, how you watched TV shows and movies and you saw commercials on TV and other manifestations of culture, of the cultural string pullers, let us say, and you did not see anti-family depictions. You did not see this push towards race mixing, towards showing every other couple as being mixed, or the ones that aren't mixed are gay couples like you have today. There was absolutely nothing like that in the 70s and 80s. Nothing like that whatsoever. There was not this hostility towards the West as a mostly homogenous group, and by homogeneity, what were we talking about? We were talking about mostly white people. Not that it was only white people, and not that the non-white people were not considered Americans, um, but there was not this hostility towards the majority as somehow the culprits or the scapegoats. There was not this hostility. Feminism was around, of course, in the 60s and 70s, but you didn't see television shows or movies that showed men being humiliated by women, or commercials where men were dominated or humiliated by women, except unless it's supposed to be something comical, unless it's meant to be something where we're laughing at the man for not being a real man. uh, um, Something like Desi Arnaz getting befuddled by Lucille Ball and all of her antics. You've got some explaining to do. That's significantly earlier, but that's something that comes to mind. That was not an example of men being shown up to be idiots and to be, constantly bested by women who are just smarter than they are, and men are just a bunch of dunces who just sit around and get fat and watch television and so forth, and just do gross things and are just completely unsympathetic, and women are so much better. You didn't see that in pop culture manifestations, even with feminism being rife in the culture, even with lots of things in the culture that that were being heavily pushed at the time. There was still this respect, generally speaking, for the majority. This idea we don't want to alienate, the people who are the vast majority, and the kind of values that they hold, that the vast majority hold. Of course, sexual mores were changing. Things were more open, or things were more, I would say, more licentious. That would be my word. That's a word that's expressing judgment, of course. But let's just say that the sexual revolution was running its course. But still in all, for all of that, there wasn't this hostility towards the majority. Then the Cold War ended, and then it seemed that because this while the Cold War was going on, there was this necessity of getting the majority behind the idea of fighting for America, and yes, we love you and we care for you because you are Americans, and so we need to stand together as Americans, and so forth. After the Cold War ended, there was no more need for that, and so as a result, the cultural movers and shakers turned on the same groups that they had basically supported, that they basically expressed support for, and whose values they generally upheld, with the Cultural Revolution and various other things that were changing within the culture. Now, we began to hear from the 90s onward, there started to be this openly anti-white drumbeat, and we started to see men being shown to be idiots and women being shown to be superior, and men getting emasculated as something that ought, not as a depiction, as a comedic depiction, that's really reflecting something that's negative. Where we're laughing at the man because he's getting bossed around by his wife. Now it's sort of like men are being emasculated, and that's a good thing, because men suck, men are terrible, and whites are being shown up as bigots and racists, and they're getting their comeuppance, and that's a good thing too. And so there's this more of an effort to pit Americans against each other. Like even with the Democrats and the liberal Democrats in the 70s and 80s, who were pro-union and who were supposedly in favor of the working man. Well, the working man, that was about class. That was not about race. The working man could be white, could be black, could be any other color, but it was not a divisive sort of depiction, insofar as it did not say that it wasn't about race. It wasn't primarily anyway about race. So as I said, I've gone through all this before. I guess I'm going on. I'm repeating myself a little bit here, but I think my opinion is, my observation is, having lived through a lot of these years, that the time of change was the time of the great pivot was in the 90s, and beyond. And so you started to see, we've got less use. The elites were saying we don't need these people anymore, to be cannon fodder for the Cold War, to whether physically cannon fodder or psychologically cannon fodder. We don't have to seed this patriotic nonsense anymore of like we're all Americans and we stand together as Americans to fight the communist threat, since that wasn't a threat anymore, since Russia was the former Soviet Union was in shambles and the Cold War was over. So now all their energies were devoted towards now that they'd reached the end of history, as it was called by one thinker. So now it was all about these social justice warrior kinds of issues, righting the wrongs, and what that ultimately amounted to was pitting Americans and also people from other countries. It was all over the West. It's been all over the West. I shouldn't put it in past tense because it's still happening. Of course, it gets worse and worse every year, pitting us all against one another, and the device that hence we have the kind of divisiveness that we have today. I remember naively thinking back in the year 2000, Bush versus Gore, after the Clinton years were over, thinking, and the election ended and it was so close, and went to the courts, and for weeks and weeks afterwards, and I was just thinking to myself, it can't possibly get any worse than this. Just laughing at myself, thinking that at the time, like the 2000 election, just that was the low point. It couldn't get worse than that. Well, then they decided that they did need us to feel patriotic again and to unite against a common enemy after 9/11, which I won't go into what I believe to be the origins of that event. But again, please visit my site, 19arabs.blogspot.com, if you want to read my thoughts on what really happened that day, what that day was really all about. 19 Arabs with just 19arabs.blogspot.com. The full title is 19 Arabs with Box Cutters, but the way to get there is 19arabs.blogspot.com. So there was briefly a kind of patriotizing of the United States again, and there was another war. And even the people who were against the war in 1990, 91, they were few and far between, and they were, or maybe there were a lot of them, but they were just, heavily outnumbered, and they didn't get depicted very often, and they were successfully intimidated by the phrase "support our troops." Support our troops. If you don't support our troops, then you're not for America. You must be rooting for Saddam Hussein. And that was the same strategy was used in 2003 in what proved to be a longer war and a more costly war, and something that really ended up burning people out, ultimately, especially when they saw the aftermath of the war and how things just were utterly screwed up over there, and that the WMD thing was a scam. Anyhow, I'm trying to draw these two threads together. So what we've seen happen in the culture is this greater and greater push to demonize the so-called silent majority, the sort of people who were generally considered traditional Americans, and the traditional American family structure, the notion of the man going to work and getting the kind of wages from his employer whereby he could support his family, which used to be the case in our economy back in the baby boomer days. Has not been the case for a long time since. Why has that happened? One asks, one wonders. I think it's largely because those same groups, those same elite groups who really run things, the string pullers, and so forth. At one time, it was in their interest to have us all be united and vibing together and feeling happy together about being Americans. But then it became in their interest, it became their project to balkanize America, to turn Americans against each other, to seed out all of this divisive rhetoric, to demonize whiteness, to demonize men, to try to portray the traditional couple as a mixed race couple, to try to normalize non-heterosexual couples, when in a proportion that is not anywhere close to what you see if you actually look out at the world and see the couples that are out there. So as this, actions have consequences, and as the opinion shapers, the puppet masters, as they have turned things in this direction, turned the dial in the exact reverse direction that they had turned the dial in the 70s and 80s, when they were pro unity, pro-American, pro-white, male, traditional family, and so forth. Now they're turning it all in the opposite direction. That the consequences of that are people are on some level aware that the people who rule them hate them. And when people become aware, again, on some level, it might be an inchoate level, they might not be able to articulate it, but when they become aware that the people who rule them hate them, that every TV show they see is about how they suck, and every movie is about how they how our traditional ideas are bad, and white people are just bigots and men are terrible, and so forth and so on. People get tired of that, and And so I believe that is a reason why, that is a big reason why, just to tie these two threads together, uh, why we see less of a rah-rah kind of. I mean, hell, they've done it to the military too. They've eviscerated the military. They've pussified the military. They've made the military all about men in high heels and skirts, and it's just ridiculous. It's become a farce, and people can see that. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me know. I want to end this quickly because this went longer than I thought it would. Let me know what you think. Andy Nowicki, altrightnovelist.com. My latest book, The Insurrectionist, can be purchased from terrorhousepress.com.